All right, well, welcome back. It is good to be with you guys on this Thursday edition of Pastor's Podcast. I am Bob, joined with Todd, and we do have our special guest here with us, Gay Carozza. We'll get to that in just a minute. We are happy to be with you, and we are continuing our series today called Family Matters, and we are looking at still marriage. We've been talking about marriage and talking about conflict and talking about how to love and how to disciple. And so today we actually want to talk about navigating seasons of adversity within the marriage. And one of the reasons we want to talk about this is because every marriage goes through adversity. If you've been married longer than the quote-unquote honeymoon phase, anywhere from 10 minutes to a week, you've probably had some sort of adversity that's happened in your marriage,
Honeymoon
right?
period only lasted 10 minutes for you? Is that
I was just generally saying,
Okay.
hopefully my wife's not listening. It was a little longer. But so yeah, we want to just get really practical and hopefully hit on some things that could encourage you guys as you're going through your marriage, how to face these things. So we asked Gay to come and speak. You are no stranger to adversity in your marriage, and we just wanted to be able to pick your brain, ask you some questions, and hopefully encourage some of the people who are out there. So I'm going to pass this over to you if you want to ask Gay some questions.
Well, Gay, first of all, thanks for being with us today. It's a real privilege to have you here and to be able to talk through some of the dynamics that you experienced with Ken. And I just asked you how long it's been since Ken passed away, and you said it's been 4 years, just over 4 years. So August of 2017, Ken passed away. And I just have to say, before we dive into that, Ken was such a friend and such a brother to me, such an encouragement to me in ministry, and he just was such a joy and a blessing, and I miss him greatly, and I know you do as well.
That means a lot.
Thank you. How long were you and Ken married?
Just shy of 32 years.
32 years.
31 years and 10 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so tell everyone a little bit. I think most people listening probably know what happened, but if someone's listening that doesn't know, what happened, what news did you get a couple years before he passed away? What was the physical health situation that you guys had to endure together?
Okay. Well, the diagnosis came as a big shock to us because he seemed to be doing just fine, although in retrospect we could see that there were some difficulties for about the previous year, but we kind of attributed some of the word-finding problems he was having to middle age. And I have them all the time, so we didn't think anything of it. But when we got the diagnosis, it came as a result of a trip to the emergency room. And it was very sudden, and we were shocked. So yeah, initially there was a lot of surprise and the trauma of the announcement that he had a terminal, aggressive, malignant brain tumor from which he would not recover. They told us right away that there was no cure, that we were dealing with a lot of surprise, but we also were overwhelmingly aware of the Lord's presence with us in that time and His sovereignty. And so we were also in the midst of the shock and trauma at rest.
So it was, if I remember correctly, a neuroglioblastoma.
Yes, they called it a glioblastoma multiforme, which I guess they've dropped the multiforme part. Now they just call it a glioblastoma.
And so he got this diagnosis. You went through treatment. If I remember correctly, there was a surgery, and the surgery was initially, it went well. They thought they got a good portion of it, but within a few months, it came back again.
Well, so the thing about glioblastomas is they can never fully take those cells out of the brain. And so he went through this first surgery awake. They needed to be able to talk to him so that he could respond to questions, so they would know they weren't taking out parts of his brain that would be critical to communication. But it was a full year before it resurfaced, and we had to go through another brain surgery. So yeah, he had a good first year. After that first year, if people did not know Ken, they would never have known that he had a brain tumor. He did really well.
So let me ask you something. It's not on here, but I'm sure you'll be able to answer it. So he gets the diagnosis. He comes home. How do you, as a married couple, take that information and then give it to your kids?
Well, our daughter was a senior in high school, and she knew before we even came home. We were in the hospital several days together after that ER trip. Our son was at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and so I think she learned of it probably through a phone call. I honestly don't remember because we were just dealing with a lot of information to process all at once. But yes, we did have to place the phone call to our son for sure. And it was hard. Yeah, it was hard news.
What were some of those early conversations you had? So you get the diagnosis, the word terminal, well, the word cancer is there, the word terminal is there. At that point, you didn't know how long he would have,
Right.
but you knew that the average life expectancy after diagnosis was, 18 months?
We had some very conflicting reports. The original neurosurgeon, who we, by the way, did not end up using, here in Grand Rapids had said, when you walked into the hospital room 24 hours after we had arrived at the ER, and he said, well, if you don't have surgery, you'll live 6 months. If you do, you'll live 12 months. And if you have surgery and chemo and radiation, you'll live 18 months. Just like that. And of course,
Not very good
no
bedside
one
manner.
knows. No, not very good bedside manner at all. In fact, when he left the room, I remember he was hurrying to get to another surgery, and Ken hollers after him, "Don't forget to count the sponges." So he kept his sense of humor through it all as well.
He
But
did.
yeah, it doesn't take very long for this disease to consume a person. And the fact that he did live for 27 months after this diagnosis, I think is a very large result of the excellent neurosurgeon that we found. So initially those conversations were, where are we going to go? Because we know we don't want to stay here in Grand Rapids. Where can we find a good neurosurgeon? And some of our friends got to work on our behalf, and we had a good friend who's in medicine, and he started researching U of M, and we ended up finding a wonderful surgeon who was actually a solid believer as well. And we were just tremendously blessed in his expert skills. He just was a fabulous surgeon.
So in between all those discussions about surgery and doctors and visits to U of M and all of that stuff, take us into some of the conversations you and Ken are having outside of the details of the diagnosis. What are the fears? What fears, if any, do you have in those early months? What are some of the conversations you and Ken are having? And maybe related to that, how is Ken shepherding you as your husband through his own battle with cancer?
So we have always talked about everything. As a married couple, communication was like the best thing we had going for us. And so as far as conversations go, we right away started talking about end of life. What's that going to look like? Ken made an appointment, and we got in to see an attorney and developed our wills. That was important. And I'm sorry we hadn't done it sooner, but the Lord gave us time. And Ken's communication skills returned really right away after they gave him some steroids to kind of relieve the swelling and inflammation that was in his brain at that time. So we continued to talk about we talked a lot about heaven. We talked about the goodness and the kindness of the Lord, even in the midst of this. And I remember overhearing a conversation he had actually with his dear friend that was out in California. And I could hear Ken's end only. I wasn't on the phone, but I remember hearing him say to his friend, I have been preparing my whole life for this moment. And I knew by that he meant, ever since he had come to Christ at the age of 24, Ken had been living in light of eternity and knowing that he was going to stand before God one day and give an account. And so he knew that all of his life investment up to this point had been preparing him for this moment.
So how does his confidence in the Lord and his trust in the Lord and his hope of seeing the Lord and being in heaven, how does that spill over onto you? As you're walking side by side with him through this trial, you're watching the cancer eventually debilitate him even further and then take his life. How does his confidence, his walk with the Lord, how does that affect you as his wife?
It was huge. It was huge. And I had not mentioned, as you asked about the shepherding, that modeling, his modeling was really his best shepherding for me during that time. He modeled a heart of submission to the Lord in all of this. He modeled the peace of the Lord in all of this. And he just modeled tremendous courage. He didn't falter one bit. I think the only fear that I knew that he had was that he would be racked with pain at the end in his head. And the Lord graciously preserved him from that. He never experienced one moment of pain. So his shepherding was really his modeling. And just the fact that we continued to remain close to one another.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how's the Lord working in your marriage during those months, as from diagnosis to 27 months later? How's he working in your conversations, your communication, your marriage? How is this trial? How did it change your marriage? I mean, prior to that, you're just going through life. You're raising kids. You're sending kids off to college and finishing high school, and then suddenly you get this life-altering news. How does that affect your marriage, and how did it over the course of those 2 months change how you and Ken related to each other, and then how you even related to the Lord as a married couple?
Well, there wasn't ever a moment where it's like we were going one direction and then the diagnosis came and it totally turned our lives around. It wasn't like that at all.
Okay.
Because we had always had a very healthy and strong friendship and relationship with each other and with the Lord. He just used this adversity to grow us even deeper. And our friendship grew deeper. Our relationship with the Lord grew deeper. Our communication just continued. It was just a depth. There was a deepening in our marriage that it was sweet. It was a sweetness that really developed in a greater degree. And that's not to say that there were not hard times through that. I mean, after Ken's second surgery, the cancer, as it began to spread more, it really did affect him and the way he perceived the world around him, because the cancer was consuming more of his brain. And so it was difficult. At times he became angry, and I became the brunt of that anger, which was just killing me, because I knew this wasn't what he would be acting like under normal circumstances, although he could be angry. I'm not saying he was not. He had a good side of anger towards him, but this was it. I just knew this was not just his normal response. This was because some of the things he'd get angry about just really made no sense. And so that was very difficult, but there was a definite depth and deepening that the Lord brought us to, even through that grew our marriage and grew us closer to Him.
So talk a little bit about the early years of your marriage. So this was not your first trial. This was not the first time that you and Ken had to work through difficulties. You had faced adversities before. So take us through some of those early years of your marriage. How did those prepare you for this one? I guess what I'm getting at is you've got people listening to this that they're just 2 years into marriage, maybe 8 years into marriage, still early on. And so how did those years and how did you handle trials during those years ultimately come to bear upon this one?
Yes, so this wasn't our first adversity.
Right.
Yeah. We had experienced difficulties, as any marriage does, but foundational for us was the fear of the Lord in our marriage. And because we feared the Lord, we were committed to each other, not only for our good and the good of our marriage, but the good of our children, and also for the glory of God. And so having that fear of the Lord was just foundational for helping us to deal with the adversities and the conflicts that would arise in our marriage. His word, God's word, was foundational, and we took his prescription for oneness very seriously. So we each made the other our best friend. That was a conscious decision that we made, and a commitment to each other that the Lord helped us to continue to grow. Because Christ was the center of our marriage, and he was the head of our marriage. As Bob and I were talking the other week, when Christ is at the head and you're each pursuing him, you grow closer to each other. You work out your conflicts, you just resolve them. I remember one of our vows, we said that divorce would never be an option out of any of our trials or problems that we had. And we had them within our honeymoon, within our first few days of our marriage, conflict arose. And yet that commitment was there because of our fear of the Lord.
Sure.
We took his prescription for marriage seriously. And then good daily communication was also key. I cannot say we always did this perfectly, but we had 4 rules of communication in our marriage. They were: be honest, keep current, attack problems, not people, and act. Don't react. And we also tried to resolve our conflicts quickly. I cannot say that the sun never went down on
Sure.
somebody's anger, but
I'm not sure any of us can ever say that.
yeah, but that was the standard that
Yeah.
we aimed for, and so we were committed. We were committed to that. And then, I guess that would be it, that just being each other's best friends and cultivating honest and true and loving communication helped us through all of those.
So say something to the husbands who are listening, because I'm imagining Ken set that tone for your family.
Yes, he did.
You obviously were on board with that, and you were as committed to that as he was, but women are responders. So women are going to likely respond to whatever tone their husband sets. So in a sense, for the most part, not always true.
Yeah.
But how did Ken set that tone in your family? Like what was just times around the dinner table, times that you spent together as a family? How did he just establish that fear of the Lord in your home that then carried you through everything that you had to deal with?
Well, we were committed to pursuing the Lord, both of us. And from the earliest days of our marriage, I mean, even before we were married, I knew Ken wanted to pursue seminary and ministry. And so God was central. Christ was central. And we would remind each other that this isn't all there is. that we're going to stand before the Lord one day and give an account. And that was a huge help to me. Oh, sorry, Jacob, I bumped my mic. It was a huge help to me because there are times in your marriage that you have to look at your husband and go, okay, I have to see Christ behind him and know that my response to my husband in this moment is my responsibility. And I need to submit to the Lord as he's working through my husband. And I am sure Ken had to do the same thing as he would look at me. And maybe I wasn't always cooperating with God's program either, and see the Lord behind me and recognize that he is sovereignly using our marriage, using each other to sanctify us and to make us the man and woman of God he wanted us to be.
It's good.
How we talk a lot about roles, husband and wife having distinct roles, equal worth, but distinct roles in Scripture. How did you see, as you're going through this 27 months, how did you see your role kind of change?
It definitely did.
And so, first of all, how did it change? But then, secondly, how were you internally perhaps taking on some of what he was doing? Obviously, wasn't physically able to do those things. So how did that look for you? I'm just thinking of the ladies who may be watching this and, they're going through some hard times, or maybe they're ahead. So maybe some encouragement, or just letting them know that they're, you did survive, obviously, going through all of that, but you yourself had to maybe change your mindset a little bit about what your role was with him.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you're right about the roles. Ken had always been a super strong leader, and I recognized that my primary role was as his helpmate. After the diagnosis, I became laser focused in my role as a helpmate, knowing that he was going to need more support than ever. And as his cognitive abilities declined, I also had to help with those decisions that we had to make more than ever, and sometimes making decisions for us that I knew would be difficult for him to even get involved in making. And so I had to make some decisions without him, which was new. I mean, that was a big change. And I don't think he particularly appreciated it at the times, because it seemed like a message to him that he was somehow slipping and not measuring up. But yeah, there was a change that I began to take more of the nurturing and caring and helping him. He'd always been such an exceptional communicator. And one of the ways that the Lord used me in this time, because we had such excellent communication skills together, as Ken started losing his ability to communicate, he would want me right at his side in any social setting, because we had established, we knew each other so well by this point in our marriage that when his language would fail him in a conversation with someone, he would turn to me and just say, "Help me." And because I knew him so well, I could finish communicating his thoughts to the other person. And I knew I was doing okay when his head would just be nodding up and down as if to say, "Yeah, that's what I'm trying to tell you." I could finish his sentences for him, and that was such a privilege. Wow. It was such a privilege.
Wow. Some of the sweetest moments during those 27 months and some of the hardest moments.
Okay. Well, let's get rid of the hardest moments first. Watching the emotional impact and just the total impact on my children because of the diagnosis. That was very difficult. And trying to help them process that, not just throughout the illness, but even extended months into after he had already gone to heaven. So that was the hardest, seeing that impact that the diagnosis had on them. Other hard moments I've mentioned, we had some very frustrating times of trying to get over some of these hurdles in the communication process where he was struggling and losing his ability to process and perceive the world around him correctly. Those were very painful times. I would say the sweetest moments were when we would be able to pray together, just to pray with one another, lying in bed at night, holding each other closely, and continuing to minister. I mean, there were many times that it was like Ken got laser focused on finishing well, and he was making the most of every opportunity to point others to Christ. I'm telling you, it was like every single person that the Lord brought into our lives, he would give them a book or a CD or a DVD, and he would talk about the Lord, and from the doctors to the nurses to the PAs and the technicians, I mean, everybody, he would just talk to them about the Lord. And so that was really sweet to be able to minister with him in that, because I was always with him. Even though I was working, when we'd go to the appointments, we were always together. So, yeah, it was sweet moments. And just being able to talk about heaven and anticipate with him what's it going to be like for him, you know, to meet the Lord face to face at last. And good memories were there as well. Yeah.
So you've talked about it a little bit, but as it becomes clear that Ken's going to pass away, how do you prepare yourself for that? How do you kind of gather yourself and your thoughts and your emotions, and how the Lord sustained you through that time?
Staying close to the Lord was so critical. I mean, I maintained that daily time with him in his word and prayer, and that was key for me. But also, the Lord prepared me. I mean, I didn't have to do a lot to prepare because God prepared me. And I would say those last 8 months were very difficult for us because those contained the hardest times together. The Lord used those 8 months, and watching Ken decline, that was very hard. And knowing that this wasn't going to end in any kind of healing on this side of eternity made me look forward for his sake to the healing that he would experience in the presence of the Lord. And the last few weeks of his life, really, they were the hardest, most physically and emotionally demanding weeks I have ever endured. And to go through that and to watch his rapid decline, not just with the communication, but every aspect of his body, just with cancer consumed his brain, and your brain controls everything. And so to see that happen so quickly, the Lord just gave me a heart that desired seeing his release from this. And though it was hard, that was what the Lord really used to prepare me for saying goodbye.
Wow. So as we wrap things up here, what would you say to the young couple they're 2 years into marriage, and they're having their squabbles and they're having their fights, and they're saying, you know, this isn't quite what I thought marriage would be. It's not.
Been there, done that.
You know, it's life hits and the reality hits, and you're working through hard things, and it's a joy. It's a wonderful joy, but
most of the time.
Most of the time, but it's hard. And so you've got, you know, some couples in the early stages of their life. What do you say to them that you would encourage them? What advice would you give them as they're navigating some of these smaller adversities that are most likely preludes to bigger adversities that would eventually come?
I do say to people in conflicts, marriage conflicts, to recognize that your spouse is not the enemy. Your spouse is God's gift to you. The evil one is the enemy, and to pin the blame where it belongs, that he is the one who wants to sow division. He wants to destroy our friendship and our marriage, and to recognize that you're wrestling not against flesh and blood, but that the evil one is the enemy and not your spouse. Because it is easy to go, wow, you are not the person I thought you were, or you are not the man that I married or the woman that I married, and to think of your spouse as the enemy when they are not. They are God's gift to you, each of us. Who are married, our spouse is his greatest gift to us. So to recognize that, to be able to work through your conflicts, attack problems, not people. Work through those conflicts and recognize that your marriage ultimately is not about you. It's about God's glory.
That's good.
And how he wants to reflect himself to the world around you. So having that perspective, I think, is big.
It's really good.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we certainly appreciate you coming here and sharing with us,
I
and
appreciate it.
letting us ask you some personal questions. And we do hope that it would be able to bless those who are listening or watching. And just to, some of the main points that you made just before we close, I thought were very helpful, where you saw yourself as his helpmeet. He was a very strong leader. So the men who are out there, the reason why, one of the reasons why your marriage seemed to do well, even in a very turbulent time, was the two of you had laid the foundation, and you were able to trust him, and you were able to really be there to support him, even as he was going through this. And I think that was very evident with, how you've come through, and you're able to speak highly of that. And I found it very encouraging as you were talking, how you were actually encouraged, and even though obviously there were some hard times in that 27 months, as you were saying, but even those things God was using to refine you and him, and ultimately bringing the two of you closer together. And I think that's just wonderful. So thank you for sharing and being transparent with us.
Could I add one more
absolutely
thing?
can.
Yeah, just for one other piece of advice, because sometimes and oftentimes an illness will come into the life of one or the other partner. And one of the things that was key for me was to not pull back. And it's a great temptation, and I never understood it until I was actually in it. When you have a spouse who has a severe or terminal illness, the temptation is to want to withdraw and to pull away for self-preservation and to protect yourself. But we need to move in when your spouse is going through a difficult time that's beyond their control. We need to push in, lean in, and move closer to them, and the Lord will reward that and grow you more deeply in love with each other through that.
That's good. And that's even kind of in accordance with acting, not reacting. So you want to dive into that. So it's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Well, guys, we hope this has been a blessing to you. We will continue on our Family Matters series. We have several more to go. We're hoping to get some other people to come in, and we can interview them, ask them some intrusive questions as well, and hopefully be able to bless you. So anyway, hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.